Welcome to Caribbean Tea. From St. Vincent, Kendall Morgan in Georgetown, Guyana, Dennis Chabral, and I am Vivian Williams in New York. Adrianna Younge, Between the Lines of Power and Proof, Contrasting Perspectives of Attorney General Anil, Nandlall, and Dr. Dexter Todd. This is Caribbean Tea, the podcast where we stir the pot on the region's most pressing issues, social, legal, cultural, and political, with unflinching honesty and thoughtful analysis. It is bold conversation steeped in truth and clarity. Today we revisit one of the most emotionally charged and nationally significant conversations unfolding in Guyana. The tragic death of 11-year-old Adrianna Younge. Between the lines of power and proof, we critically examine the diverging perspectives of two central voices. Attorney General Anil Nandlall SC, speaking from the seat of institutional authority, and Dr. Dexter Todd, a legal and forensic expert, challenging the official narrative. Through excerpts from their appearances on Caribbean Tea, Adrianna, the Forensics of Justice, and Voices of Grief, Cries for Justice, we unpack the clash between state assurances and forensic interpretation, between public relations and public trust. This is Caribbean Tea. Let's begin. Dennis?
Well, after two autopsies and a lengthy police investigation, essentially the conclusion is that there was no evidence of any criminal involvement in the death of 11-year-old Adrianna Younge. Her body was found in a pool at the Doubleday Hotel at Tushin, East Bank, Essequibo, about 60 miles west of Georgetown on the 24th of April 2025. But the matter is yet to be over because Attorney at Law Dr. Dexter Todd says that there needs to be a thorough investigation, and that's backed up by one of the forensic pathologists in Georgia, United States, who indeed cites the need for a thorough investigation, although she said that the first autopsy that was done in Guyana by 3 forensic pathologists was thorough.
Dennis, I know that you actually stated that it was determined that there was no foul play, or this was not a case of murder. Was there some report that stated that, or is that some form of conjecture or inference from something? Because I haven't seen anything that sort of stated it so clearly.
No, well, the last press release by the Guyana Police Force essentially seemed to conclude, based on Mr. McCutcheon's account, that from the perspective of the girl being in the pool, that had the pool been checked earlier and properly, then they would have been able to ascertain that in fact her body wasn't there. The police force press release reads, no evidence of foul play. That's one subcaption in the release. And in the earlier section of the release, it says, according to Mr. McCutcheon, if a thorough search had been done of the pool by properly trained and properly equipped people at the onset, this investigation would have very likely not garnered the international attention and political pressure that it finds itself in today. And in terms of the evidence, no evidence of foul play, he listed at least 4 things why he believed so, and categorically said that there was no evidence of foul play by any persons named or named at any time during the course of this investigation. There is concrete video evidence and no evidence by any people who were interviewed that Butch Narayan Bola was at a Doubleday Hotel during the time that Adrianna Younge was known to be there and be alive on April 23, 2025.
Well, what I want to say about that, that's the official position of the police and the government. As independent fact finders, I think it is important to acknowledge that that's the official position of the Guyana Police Force. I don't think that it might be the best thing for us to conclude that that official position is in fact. Who knows? Dr. Todd and the family may challenge that, and we don't have a fact finding from a court of law that says that factually these are the issues. And so I think that we should say that this is the position of the official position of the Guyana Police Force. Where the case leads from here is a matter that will unfold with time. What we want to do on this program is to look at the different sides, the different positions taken by the government and the family, represented by Dr. Dexter Todd. We have had extensive interviews with both the attorney for the family, Dr. Todd, and the attorney general for the government, explaining the government's position. What we will do today is revisit those interviews, revisit their positions, which we allow them to express without much interjection. But today we look at their various positions and try to dissect them. So let's start off with Dr. Todd talking about the crime scenes, and then we'll come back and have discussions here.
What we saw taking place is that there was a total collapse of protocols in relation to how the police ought to have handled an alleged crime scene. Now, it is clear, even where you have received a missing person report, and then you subsequently got the report that there is a body found in a pool, automatically you cannot rule out that you're dealing with a crime scene, an alleged crime scene, that is. And therefore, immediately you ought to have the correct persons on ground, meaning that you ought to have your crime scene investigators on the ground, someone taking charge. And this is always been, I believe, each and every police officer who has been trained in forensic would understand that there must be a clear protocol which one has to adopt. That being, there must be someone who is responsible for the ranks on the ground, who will be giving instruction.
So what you have there is Dr. Todd setting the stage here. And his position is largely that there weren't proper systems in place. There weren't proper procedures followed. And in the absence of those proper procedures and systems, that things pretty much fell apart, creating some problems with respect to the credibility of the investigation, the credibility of what we're discussing, and the impetus for the chaos that actually flowed once a body was discovered. Dennis, in your view, does this sort of accurately set up what Dr. Todd's position is, and more or less the family position is with respect to this matter?
Well, I cannot be so certain that there were no crime scene detectives there on that given day. What I do know, based on my observation of the various live feeds, is that there was little effort made to control the crowd at a given point in time, especially when tensions grew high. In fact, this incident or occurrence started overnight, and there was a build-up. People going live, calling for help, and there was also eventually the movement of tires in the street and efforts being made to burn those tires. Police intervened. The tires were pulled away from the police, and then that started. So I think there was sufficient time for the police to take whatever steps they ought to have taken to ensure that there was a lot of crowd control for the preservation of what might be considered the larger scene, that is to say, the hotel of an incident. And I don't think that that was done. So I would say that in that respect, Dr. Todd was accurate. But to say that there were no crime scene detectives there, I will not be able to say. And more so given the fact that most times the crime scene detectives do not wear uniform.
Dennis, you actually pressed Dr. Todd on this question and asked him pretty much how he might have addressed the issue of crowd control. I want to play that back and forth with Dr. Todd and then talk about his position on what could have obtained.
In light of what transpired there, I personally was not to the ground, but I looked at the live videos from many sources, and I saw hundreds of people in the roadway. Then at one stage, people were actually trying to bolt through the door of the hotel. When the body was found, people were actually storming into the building. We had people at various levels of the hotel. In that kind of scenario, and with a bit of forward planning, for instance, from a layman's perspective, would you have asked the tactical services unit to come out to give you support?
Of course, to assist in forming part of the cordon of to ensure that persons do not infiltrate that cordon that you would have set up. It would have been important for you to call immediately for other manpower to control that. And I've always said one of the things also that is very, very important is to always have someone who can properly communicate with the public, and in this case with persons, and immediately alerting them of the importance of the preservation of the alleged crime scene. All right. And so I know at the time, it was quite chaotic. So maybe a lot of the protocols could not realistically be, play out. But at least we did not see the attempt in relation to that. And I believe that is where the problem is.
So what Dr. Todd is actually saying is that the police could have taken some measures to ensure that there was effective crowd control. But this case is an interesting case. It is one that Guyana doesn't have much experience and a record to reflect on, to find some sort of customary practice on how it could have been dealt with. And here are some important issues that I think one has to consider, not as a sort of a Monday night quarterback. The essential question would be what steps and to what extent the police should have gone when you have a missing child and a community comes out in search of the missing child. To what extent, if the claim is that a child is missing and the child went missing, let's say, somewhere within the premises of the hotel, and that there was a call by a community that was resolute and strong in support of the family in search of an 11-year-old girl, that you could have used the tactical service unit to keep them at bay. Would that have been realistic? Would it have been acceptable to the public?
I think those questions are clearly ones that the police and the authorities generally will have to look at for any future occurrences of this nature. Because I think as the police look at their actions in the early stages of this incident, they'll come to realize that some of the issues that the public seem to be having now with accepting the reports of the pathologists may be because there is so much uncertainty surrounding what happened there, and there is the opening for speculation. So clearly, there are some serious lessons that I think the authorities would have to look at coming out of the early handling of this situation.
Dennis, you're on the ground. Do you really think that the scenario where the TSU is being called out to keep people at bay really would have worked?
It it may have worked, but at the same time, it may have led to a further charging of emotions, because here it is, you have parents, family members, and relatives, as well as friends, who are there trying to ascertain the whereabouts of Adrianna Younge, and the police resorting to tear gas or to pellets. But one really has to find a balance between preserving the scene of an incident with the expectations of loved ones in such a situation. Um, so here we are, where an incident occurred, the body was found, autopsies were done, and basically we are left with the conclusion that this was a drowning. Perhaps if the scene was properly preserved, there may have been a better chance of the police detectives trying to have a first-hand and realistic and real-life um, perspective of the scene of the incident, and in that case, I say in totality the entire hotel, um, because we're still now, even at the supposed tail end of all of this, still talking about the recreation of crime scenes and looking for videos and all of that. All of that probably could have been prevented if the scene was properly preserved, albeit with some degree of force.
Well, there is no doubt that there were lapses in this particular case, lapses on the part of the police, how the matter was handled initially, and the Attorney General did respond to this. This was one of the areas that he was pressed on, and let's listen to him.
AG, is there anything in the way that the case was handled initially that the government regrets?
The government has accepted that, has accepted and has expressed concerns about some aspect of the investigations initially. And those concerns were expressed both at the level of the president and the vice president. But we have moved long beyond that. When you go back to the time when the phone call would have been received and try to fix yourself in the events as they were unfolding, the police, I believe, acted reasonably when they sought to act upon that information. And they did. And they made an arrest and they detained that person for a few hours and then released that person. Frankly speaking, I don't know that the police could have acted in any other manner. They had to take that information on board. They had to interrogate that information. And apparently when it didn't yield any further results, they obviously abandoned it. But I don't think that the police acted unreasonable there at all.
If we may take one step back, in the initial stages, what seems to be accepted as a fact is that the police indicated to the family and apparently to the public not only that they received a tip, but that they verified that tip and assertively said that the young girl left the hotel, the premises of the hotel, in the car, which was not said in the form of a tip, that they had merely received information. And in fact, they said that they have seen this on a videotape. In your view, would you consider taking into consideration that the police acted properly when they disseminated this information in the manner in which they did?
No, I want to draw a distinction between disseminating the information and I wouldn't go as far as you have gone and say that they have positively asserted. They gave a statement. They made a statement. Whether they should have made that statement, I am not sure. But what I do know, where I'm saying that they acted reasonably, is that they could not have not pursued that tip or that information that they received. Any reasonable police officer receiving that type of information ought to have acted on it, and they did.
Attorney General, are you affirmatively saying that it is not the case that the police affirmatively said to the parents of the girl that they have looked at the video and from what they have seen in the video, the girl left the premises of the hotel?
No, there's no need for me to affirmatively say anything. The police issued a statement.
For the benefit of our viewers and listeners, the police said in that statement that the command center in Regional Division Number 3 was contacted and viewed footage and showed that Adrianna entered a red and black Rom motor car bearing a certain registration number, which drove off in an eastern direction heading towards Reading Hoop. Viewed footage that showed, I mean, isn't that the bungling on the part of the police force then to roll that back and say?
Certainly. I mean, you would have seen that government officials have asked for that video, and it has not been produced. So there is no doubt that it was bungling of the investigation in that regard.
What do we make of the Attorney General sort of trying to explain that the police acted properly in the circumstances?
What I gathered from him was that when these incidents or incidents of this nature occur, things are a bit chaotic, and the tendency is to act on impulse and to go at what seems to be the most useful option at the time. I think he's also, having had time to reflect on the actions of the police, is also hinting at the fact that they, on reflection, would have questions to ask themselves about whether, in fact, the best choices were made. And especially as now the incident has grown beyond what they obviously would have thought it would have been at that time. There is the public perception as well that I think he's responding to, in part, public perception that this matter was taken fairly lightly initially, as though it was just a missing child incident that would be solved in a quick time, and that had they foreseen the manner in which it developed, that they may have taken a different route. And again, it is becoming even more important now that the reports of the pathologists are, especially the last one, the reports are pushing towards going back to a police investigation, and they're the ones who have helped to create a situation where questions are being raised.
Well, I think it's a little bit more complicated. Here, the Attorney General is simply saying that the police received a tip, and the police issued a release announcing the tip as if it were a fact, not as if it received a tip. In every investigation, you know that once you set up a tip line, you receive hundreds, sometimes thousands of tips that basically take you down a fool's errand. So receiving a tip is not sufficient to simply detain a person and to issue a statement affirmatively stating that this tip that you received was in fact factual. So that raises questions of trust, questions of credibility, and might have set things off. It might have inflamed the situation rather than help it. It also raises serious questions for a country. How are tips processed? If someone sort of call in with a tip, who processed it, and who was supervising the investigation that authorized the release of that tip that was given, that the Attorney General claimed just simply came from a telephone call? So what level of investigation and screening is given before a tip is acted upon? And if the Attorney General is simply saying that you act on every tip in that manner, what you will find is that you will not have sufficient resources to conduct a proper investigation, because all someone has to do to put you off is to call in false tips. And simply while you're running after those false tips with your limited resources, you are being misdirected from the real persons and the real people behind what might be the crime that you're investigating. So you have the Attorney General admitting, after being pressed and after pushback from this panel, that the police did bungle things at the start, but initially he sought to, dance around that. Uh, Dennis and Kendall, do you think that that position, coming after all that the public knew, helped with enhancing confidence in the police force, confidence in what the government promised to do to ensure that there was a fair and proper investigation that resulted in a just outcome? Or did it harm that effort?
I think if there is a problem or there was a mistake, then rightfully they needed to admit. And I think, regardless of the length of time the Attorney General came around to acknowledging that there was bungling, he did so. And I think the police, in a subsequent statement, did acknowledge that some of the information that was released at that time was inaccurate. But I think all of this could have been avoided if the police force had in place a certain standard operational procedure for treating tips, regardless of whether they came by phone or face to face or other means, before an official statement is released to the media. Once that's done, then it assumes that the information that you received as a tip was properly verified up to a point before you can say, well, we're going to act on this now and go out there and try to locate the vehicle or the suspect or any other type of follow-up activity. But I also would like to say that the police force needs to take every bit of information that comes to its disposal and treat that with some measure of seriousness as part of the distillation process. So where I think the police force dropped the ball was the fact that it failed to distill that information that was provided, to ascertain the source of the information, the likely credibility of the information, and whether indeed this information at this stage can be disseminated to the public at large.
I wonder if a question that sort of crept in didn't stem from what's perceived to be a bit of a delay in acknowledging the police bundling. There seems to be some public perception that the handling by the police, that the public feels that it may be a cause for suspecting the police to be complicit in the issues surrounding the incident. I wonder if on the ground it is felt that the delay may have fueled the concerns that that the police may be complicit in this issue.
I think coming to that point, Kendall, there was the fueling of some speculation in that regard, because not only of the inaccuracy of the police statement, but because the police commander reportedly or allegedly told the mother to go home because she had been there for quite a while about looking into the interests of her daughter. And now to have this inaccurate statement come out, I don't think it really fared well with anyone, including the parents, about whether indeed there was police involvement. So, all of these elements taken together did not repose any confidence in the police force. And I think that is part of the lingering crux of the matter.
Now, this case has actually gained international attention. And looking at it from an international lens, I think that there are many issues of interest to the international community. International observers, I believe, would be bothered by several things, several positions taken by the government itself, including the Attorney General in his interview on this podcast. And I think that there is also likely to be concerns about the manner in which this case was handled generally from all sides. And I want us to take some time to pay some attention to that and to discuss some areas that I think are problematic and might not have shined the best of light on the country. Let's start off with what the Attorney General said with respect to the retention of the Canadian investigator.
Could you explain to us what is the retired Royal Canadian Mounted Police investigator empowered to do as far as investigations are concerned, and how will that be connected to the work of the Guyana Police Force?
First of all, the Guyana Police Force is the sole, exclusive, and premier law enforcement agency in Guyana to deal with civilian crimes. Even when the Army is invited to launch joint operations with the police in dealing with internal matters, the civilian authority, that is the police, takes precedence over the Army. So the investigator had to be sworn in as a member of the Guyana Police Force. And that would vest him with all the powers that the Guyana Police Force is conferred with under the Police Act, Chapter 1601. And that gives him the right to conduct the investigation along with the other investigators. Do everything that is required under the investigator and put his findings up. And that is what he's contracted to do, to produce a report in writing within a time specified in his contract.
So the Attorney General said a number of things, not only in that clip, but through the interview that we had with him, that I think should be of concern to a sovereign nation and its people. One, he stated that the police force of Guyana is the body vested with authority to conduct investigations, criminal investigations in the country. He then said that a foreigner, a non-Guyanese national, was sworn in as a member of the police force of Guyana for the purposes of leading an investigation and conducting that investigation by which a conclusion as to criminality or lack thereof would be arrived at. In that interview, the Attorney General also said, in direct response to a question you raised, Dennis, that the Police Service Commission was not involved in this matter at this stage. While that is important for several reasons. You would recall that the Attorney General also said that the government doesn't direct the police force. So my first question, and I think the first concern would be, who identified and retained this foreign national to act in the police capacity? Because that retention would have been superimposing his presence and vesting him with authority to act within the police for conducting an investigation. And secondly, as an independent nation with almost 60 years of independence, that the police infrastructure, the investigative infrastructure of a country is a very important aspect of the national security of a country. And if you check the rules and regulations for most countries, if not all, I know that this is not part of the Police Act in Guyana, that you have to be a national of the country in order to become a member of its police force. It doesn't give you that level of access to the infrastructure of the police power of a state and the infrastructure of investigative powers in the country. So that happened, but it happened while the Attorney General said and admitted there, Dennis, that the government doesn't know this person. And usually, in order to gain any sort of hiring by the police, that there must be a thorough background check. So what was the background check done? Who did it? And how it was done? The other thing that, for me, that stands out is this. If the Police Service Commission was not involved, it means that this person could not have been hired at a rank above that of a sergeant. Could have been a constable. How do you impose a constable within the police architecture of a country to investigate a matter in which there were allegations made against someone that is very high up in the police force? Would a constable, someone with the rank of a constable, have any authority to go against directions, the wishes, and the commands of a person above the level of a sergeant? And we know, because the Police Service Commission was not involved, that this person could not have been sworn in as a police above the rank of a sergeant. And it makes me ask, and I think for international observers paying attention, is this really a sovereign country, or is this a banana republic? How do you fiddle with important infrastructure like your police power just to facilitate an investigation? Now, this is one of the issues that I sought to press both Dr. Todd, the attorney for the family, and the Attorney General. And Dennis, you are a journalist in Guyana. Were you struck by this?
In terms of the appointment of the retired RCMP official, I don't necessarily think I was struck by it, but I expected more information about the background of the gentleman and also his expected role or function. But what I want to point out at this stage is the fact that the retired RCMP official, based on the police release, did not actually conduct the investigation. He reviewed the investigation that was done by the Guyana police force. I might be subject to correction, but this is essentially what was said in the police force's release. He reviewed the investigation that was done. He talked about forensic digital information. He also talked about having a look at the pathologist's report. So I don't think he actually went down in the scene and questioned people, or he got directives to go to XYZ place, or he advised himself about where else he should go and who he should ask for what. That was not conveyed to the media in the release. It seems as though he reviewed the investigation that was done by the Guyana police force, and he reviewed the report that was done by the forensic pathologists.
So, Dennis, if he merely was hired to review the report of the police force, there was no need to swear him in as a policeman in Guyana, because you don't have to be a police, for instance, members of the Police Service Commission, in order to review the work product of the police force to determine whether or not it was investigatively sound, whether the methodology used and the conclusion arrived at were sound. And so I guess you could see where I'm coming from with the fact that this person was sworn in as a member of the Guyana police force. And my question is, was this necessary? I think there should be more information forthcoming as to when he was sworn in and by whom he was sworn in and what were the circumstances under which he was sworn in. And if you talk about a person who spends a week or 2 weeks in a country sworn in as a member of the police force, what happens after that period, right? So I think that the police force is too important an institution of a sovereign country for its operations to be fiddled with in that way. So that's one of the points that I want to make. The other thing that I think is significant is that there seems to be a lot of playing around with words. If you were saying that there's going to be an investigation, because this is what we heard, that there was an investigation, an independent investigation conducted by someone from the international community or someone hired to conduct an independent investigation. So what it does, it comes right back to if what you're saying is true, and I'm not going to represent that to be true, but if that is the case, then one cannot say that an independent investigation was conducted by this person. And the question that I saw throughout my interview with Dr. Todd and the AG to get addressed is, how are you structuring this that whatever comes out of it could be considered independent? You can't have a constable who is engaging and giving directions to ranks above him or her. And because of that dynamics in terms of how the police works or how the police force operates, it becomes challenging to really simply bring a person in, give the person a contract, and swear the person in as a constable or some other low rank, and then say that this person, in essence, produced something that is above that which could have been produced or would have emanated from the police force itself. Because as a rank so junior and as a person not vested with authority to command and give directions to the other members of the police force and to be able to gain access to the investigative infrastructure of the police force, you have an outcome that is likely to be compromised. And that's what I'm really bringing to the fore. I think an incident like this should cause the country to begin to have a conversation. When foreign investigators are brought in, what are the circumstances, if any, by which they may contribute to a work product that is truly independent and that is truly valuable and one that could be relied on as an independent work that is not tainted by the very police force that you have complaints about? And to what extent and what are the parameters of foreigners in the involvement of investigations in Guyana? I think that's a critical question to develop. I have some thoughts which I'll share later on in terms of where I think that the attorney for the family missed opportunities to guide how that investigation should have been conducted and should be conducted in order to arrive at a work product that is truly independent and that truly answers questions that take us in the direction of justice.
But just to say, as Dennis did, that I was surprised when I saw the police release that indicated that the overseas investigator did an assessment of what the Guyana police had done. And I thought it was an interesting development because the family and the public generally had been calling for an independent investigation, as you alluded to. And in part because of what we had discussed earlier, the perceived bundling by the police of the initial investigation. So I think the public wanted to see a parallel investigation to see if it would create the same findings as the police, because the police had in fact issued some outcomes of their preliminary stages of their investigations. So that that raises the question of whether in fact what the public and the parents have been asking for, whether those issues have been addressed. Apart from the main issue that you raised about how the police force handles the insertion of overseas investigators, and that's a critical matter that I think will have to be looked at in the review of this overall incident.
I think that this really leaves the whole controversy mired in some degree of uncertainty as far as the fact goes that the police reports, the police investigation here was merely reviewed by Leonard McCaushan, the retired Royal Canadian Mounted Police investigator. And secondly, as we head into Guyana's general elections come September 1, we will certainly see this issue being taken center stage as far as political capital is concerned. And this is something that everyone has to keep their eyes on without in any way trying to to reduce the significance or the importance of getting to the bottom of the matter. I mean, the pathologists that they report, they said it was drowning. The investigators basically are pointing in that direction. So, it's only time will tell where this goes ultimately.
Dennis, you pressed Dr. Todd on the question of how did he actually see the use of any sort of forensics would take him along the path of justice and secure a just outcome for the family. I want to play that because I think it's important to begin to ask some questions as to what happens from here. But let's listen to that interaction and then come back.
As the legal representative for the family, and based on what you have outlined there before, Dr. Todd, where do you think all of this now leaves the prospect for justice for the survivors, the family members of young Adrianna Younge?
I believe there is a lot. There is still great hope to unearth the truth in this matter, because I believe that the science, forensic science, it exists, and I believe the proper employing of this science will at least be able to assist in eliminating some of the other possibilities that would have likely to occur. You cannot reconstruct the alleged crime scene without someone who understands how this works. And you will need a crime scene trained investigator who understands the proper use of forensic science to reconstruct that scene, because it clearly needs to be reconstructed in order for there to be a clear mapping out of the likely possibilities of this alleged incident.
I want to talk a little bit about where I think that there were some questions in terms of the strategy and the narrative that unfolded on the part of the family. And that is basically the fact that Dr. Todd placed a lot of emphasis on how forensics could salvage this and help procure justice for his clients. But I think that there was some inconsistency in the narratives that unfolded. One, he seemed to be developing, and this whole narrative, that the crime scene was contaminated. And he was adamant that there was a contamination of the crime scene. And he was and has been adamant that the collection of evidence was contaminated and compromised. While that seemed to me to be sort of damaging to the very prospects that he was seeking, the very outcome, because forensic science is one where the outcome, the value of the outcome, depends upon the method employed, the properness of that method, and a lack of compromise of the scene itself and the collection of evidence from that scene. So if you attack that whole process, the method of gathering evidence and the scene itself, that's what a defense attorney will do, to say that the forensic evidence that you are trying to introduce against my client, regardless what it says, cannot be used because it is compromised. So if he's relying on forensic evidence in order, because in this case he's sort of acting in a prosecutorial, not a defense capacity, you would expect from a prosecutorial point of view that you will want to take up the position that whatever comes from testing is something of value and not something that is compromised. So that was a strategy that I find to be conflicting, and I don't find that that was a strategy that was helpful for the case that he was making for the use of forensic in this particular case. I think that lots of the discussion on it was more academic in terms of what forensics generally could do. But in terms of how it is being used and how it could be adequately used in this specific case, I was a bit disappointed in terms of how that was approached.
I think part of the challenge we face in small societies such as Guyana and in many other parts of the developing world is that we have a very limited number of experts who can offer you an impartial or fair perspective on what essentially obtains. I say so because it would have been great for us to hear, for instance, from someone who is intimately connected, was intimately connected to the Guyana police force and does not have any political baggage, to come and tell us and the wider public what is the forensic capability of the Guyana police force. And do you have experts who can recreate crime scenes? What is your forensic capacity, both from a human resource perspective as well as from a technological perspective? And here again, it comes back to the fact that the Guyana police force, broadly speaking, not confined to this occurrence, has not been too forthcoming with the media. the senior officers of the police force are not making themselves available for this kind of engagement. For instance, we basically had to grab hold of the crime chief, Mr. Blenheim, on the corridors during shortly after the opening of the conference of the Association of Caribbean Commissioners of Police. Other than that, it is very difficult, I say almost impossible, to engage someone at that level about the capacity of the police force. So we don't know, for instance, whether all that has been said by Dr. Todd is accurate. He may be raising questions in the form of statements or comments, but to say that this is exactly what obtains in the police force, we do not know. And if indeed the police force does not have that capacity, then are they turning to other law enforcement agencies in the Caribbean and elsewhere for that kind of support and guidance and so on? So I think, again, to come back to my original point, in small societies, we have to be very wary of whether perspectives are being colored from various points of view, whether it be political, or whether it be personal, or other interests.
Well, so one of the things that struck me in the interview we had with Dr. Todd, when I asked him what was being done, he deflected to the police. For instance, he pointed out that the police wasn't organized in its investigation, but it was a question that I asked directed to him in terms of what his investigation looks like. And it doesn't seem to me as if there is an appreciation of the fact that lawyers do their independent investigation. You don't just sit back and say that the police will do this, they're not organizing doing this. So that sometimes what you could do is confront the evidence of the state. And I think that whenever he was challenged in terms of the investigation, it seems as if his interpretation of his role was that of more observing what the government and commenting on what the police was doing. And I think he did a very good job in raising public awareness about forensics and sort of pinning his hope and faith on a second autopsy, which basically ended up answering the question as to whether or not this was drowning or this was some other thing. And so there was some limit to that. There were, for instance, allegations of the coziness of the owner of the hotel, which is a part of the case that has not been explored. And I want to touch on as we wrap up. Now, even though there was a fire that consumed the hotel, these are ways in which these are things that forensic science could have been used. A forensic approach to the investigation could have been used. For instance, if you're saying that there was some sort of collusion with the police, was there any way in which you could check and have the telephone company, or even if people were asking for the involvement of the FBI, you might have been able to get that sort of assistance to address specific factual issues? Was there an increase in traffic between calls from the geolocation, the geographic location of the hotel, and numbers that are known numbers of the police and the center of the police? Because that would have been evidence that would have helped to corroborate that there might have been some collusion. I didn't see much of that taking place. And so what happened, even though you don't have that information, you could have gone back and sort of recreated to see whether or not through this approach there was in fact any evidence of that. Collaboration requires contact. You can't just simply have uncoordinated collusion in this case. So how would that take place? It would take place through telephone contact. It would take place through messaging, whether people were sending emails and text messaging. And you could have had international and local help to see whether that was taking place. If the government was not forthcoming with respect to that kind of information, you could have raised alarm with respect to that. The other way that you would have had collusion by contact would have been direct physical contact. And that would have been another avenue to say these people were in fact in contact, and therefore this evidence further the allegation of collusion. But I think it's important that as we wrap up, we examine this issue.
I was going to say, and beyond the importance of forensics, it's also the question of other forms of evidence. And the question would have to be asked whether, in fact, the authorities shouldn't be pressuring entities that offer facilities and services to the public, whether it shouldn't become compulsory that they have working cameras. That has emerged as an issue with the hotel, that apparently none of the cameras were working. And that is an important area of evidence in matters that are investigated. So that too ought to, I think, emerge as one of the things that need to be reflected on as the authorities review what happened around this case.
The Attorney General in his interview with us was strategic. And where I think that the other side might not have been as strategic as the Attorney General, I think what he did was set up where he sees this case going in the future. And I think that he's sort of laid the groundwork for how we may see justice on what the government interprets as justice in this case unfolding and playing out.
Multi-million dollars of properties have been destroyed. You see, when you are at the level of the government, you have to look at the panoramic view of the situation. You have properties have been destroyed all over the country. If those people decide to sue the state, who will be held responsible? So who triggered all these events that seem to have developed a life of their own? Some of them geographically far distanced from the locus in co. Some of them completely unrelated, but led to dire consequences, including damage and loss to property, assault and battery and wounding to innocent citizens. And then you have the police force itself and the way that it conducted this. So there's a lot of examination that will have to be done.
My view is that the Attorney General did test drive how this issue is going to be driven into the future. And it has a lot to do with that one party that has not been heard from, that has been silent and completely absent. What is likely to happen when the dust settles? The owner of this property, unless there is compelling criminal evidence by which a conviction could be secured, is going to emerge at some point in time. And the Attorney General has simply laid that out. And there is going to be civil litigation against the state. And the Attorney General has also laid out the prospect of that civil litigation, significant civil litigation against private parties. And when you listen to what he said carefully, you could begin to contemplate who some of those private parties might be. And here's where I think that the Attorney General was strategic in his approach. And I think that the other side might not have been so strategic, and in fact might have played into the narrative, this direction that the Attorney General has laid out. And here's why. Dr. Todd simply admitted in his interview, or sort of made the proposition that the police didn't provide, though it had adequate notice of significant and sufficient protection for private property. And if the finding turns out to be that there was no culpability for the owner of that private property, he has helped the state and helped that owner to make the case that the state, by virtue of its failure to adequately protect private property, is liable in this likely to be billions for the destruction of private property. And you also have, I understand, the detention of the owner, if that is true as was reported. And you have the defamation and the anguish of culpability that surrounds that owner. And I think that the Attorney General has set up the likelihood that there may be a number of other individuals who may come forward with colorable claims against the state, and I dare say private parties. And by pushing some of the narratives, I think that Dr. Todd might not have recognized that he was leading evidence for the owner of the hotel in significant civil lawsuits. When asked about what is his vision of justice for the family, that was a question I think was not sufficiently answered. And I didn't see that the investigation and the narrative pushing in the direction of an evidentiary basis and foundation for the family to seek justice in civil law if it didn't attain justice through the criminal process. And that's why I think the comparison between the government's approach, how the government is laying out its case, how the Attorney General approached this issue, and how, on the other hand, the attorney and attorneys for the family approach this issue is fundamental. And I think that these are lessons for the country. I think for experts in law and forensics overseas looking at this case, I think they would have lots of concerns and some level of disappointment with how the case was handled. This case continues to blow in the wind. This is Caribbean Tea. Thanks for joining. Please subscribe and share. Scan the QR code on the podcast cover to follow on Spotify, Amazon Music, and all major podcast platforms.